Welcome to The Explainer. Guys, we've got a massive, rapidly developing situation to unpack today. It's May 11, 2026, and those incredibly high-stakes peace talks between the United States and Iran, well, they have completely collapsed into a very tense, very precarious deadlock. Now, this diplomatic deep freeze didn't just happen out of nowhere, right? It comes right on the heels of a seriously volatile weekend on the water, where U.S. and Iranian forces literally traded fire. So we've got a fragile situation teetering right on the edge, with both sides basically throwing the other's peace proposals straight out the window. So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to impartially build the negotiation table right here and look at the weekend escalation, what Iran wants, the U.S. and Israeli demands, the global economic fallout, and finally, this incredibly shaky ceasefire. Let's just dive right in. All right, Section 1, the weekend escalation. How we went from Project Freedom to actual fire. Things unraveled fast. Just last week, President Trump pulls the plug on Project Freedom, which was that plan to use military vessels to escort merchant ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Then, over the weekend, U.S. and Iranian forces actually exchange fire, with the U.S. strictly calling their destroyer launches self-defense strikes. And by Sunday, the diplomatic channel just hits a total brick wall. And the sheer bluntness of that wall, it came straight from the top. Usually, NBC News points out these messages get routed quietly through intermediaries in Oman or the Swiss embassy. Not this time. Reacting to Iran's proposal, President Trump went right to Truth Social, declaring in all caps, totally unacceptable. He said he read the offer and just flat out didn't like it, shutting the whole framework down immediately. Meanwhile, you have the exact opposite perspective over in Iran. Their foreign ministry spokesman, Ismail Baghai, came out and publicly defended their proposal, calling it reasonable and generous. He basically accused the U.S. of making excessive demands, saying Iran's offer was meant for the good of the whole region. So you can see this massive disconnect, right? That is exactly why we're deadlocked. Which brings us to Section 2, what Iran wants. Let's look at the actual demands they put on the table. So what exactly did Baghai think was so generous? It boils down to four main things. First, an end to what they're literally calling maritime piracy. That's their term for the ongoing U.S. blockade of their ports. Second, the release of billions in frozen assets tied up in foreign banks. Third, guaranteed safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. And fourth, they want this tied to broader regional security, specifically demanding an end to ongoing Israeli attacks against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Okay, Section 3, U.S. and Israeli demands. Let's flip to the other side of the table and look at the core sticking point here. Look, if you take only one thing away from the U.S. and Israeli side today, make it this. The absolute, non-negotiable anchor for them is the complete removal of Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium. They want it out of the country, period. And here is where we hit a fundamental clash. Iran consistently denies wanting to build a nuclear bomb, though context here, they definitely accelerated enrichment after President Trump tore up the previous deal. But for the U.S. and Israel, they view that enriched material as an existential threat. They are insisting regional security is just impossible unless that material is physically extracted from Iranian soil. And the stakes behind that demand are literally life and death. On Sunday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went on CBS's 60 Minutes and bluntly warned that this conflict is not over and that if this nuclear material isn't extracted, Israel can re-engage them militarily. And Trump basically echoed the exact same sentiment to NBC News just a couple of days before that. So the military threat, very much active. Which leads into Section 4, global economic threats, or the very real price of this impasse. You might be wondering, why does a standoff halfway across the world matter to me? Well, look at this number, $103. That was the price of a barrel of Brent crude oil when markets opened early Monday. With about 20% of the world's daily oil consumption passing through the contested Strait of Hormuz, global markets are officially panicking. And those surging energy costs, they're going to trickle right down to all of us at the pump. And talk about wild timing. This huge surge in oil prices is happening right as President Trump embarks on a major state visit to China this week, trying to manage a global energy panic while simultaneously navigating a critical geopolitical summit in Beijing. That is one heck of a diplomatic tightrope. Finally, Section 5, a shaky ceasefire. Where exactly do things stand right now? Remember that temporary deal to reopen the strait from over a month ago? Well, the U.S. is officially insisting that the weekend shootouts don't mean the ceasefire is completely dead. But on the water, the reality is a whole different story. The U.S. is still maintaining a very strict, ongoing naval blockade of Iranian ports. Now, you might be thinking this blockade will force a quick resolution, right? Well, energy analysts and Western intel are basically saying no. The assessments show the Iranian regime is actually fully prepared to endure this naval blockade for months. They are dug in for the long haul. So nobody is blinking. The U.S. and Israel demand the complete removal of nuclear material, and Iran demands an end to port blockades and frozen assets. Which leaves us with this. If the Iranian regime has the capacity to wait out this naval blockade for months, how long can the global economy and our everyday cost of living sustain this standoff before something just snaps? It's a massive looming collision between a stubborn deadlock and our wallets. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, guys, and definitely keep your eyes on this one as it develops.